Hi, today we are looking at Faceted Search. We will see how you can configure it in the backend and how you can utilize it on the front end to display facets for your products to help your customers narrow down what they are searching for. My name is Morten and this video is part of the Ucommerce Academy. Let's start out by taking a look at what Faceted Search is. For this demo I will be using Umbraco, and I will use the Umbraco Masterclass final solution as an example. But please notice that this method here applies to all the CMS integrations that we have. This includes Kentico, Sitefinity, and Sitecore as well. It also applies across the web technology that you wish to use. So this example will be used in MVC, but you can also use it with Web API and with ASP.NET Web Forms or anything that you prefer. So hopefully you will be able to apply the same logic that I'm using to your context. Here I have Avenue Clothing. Let's try to go to a category. I am now on the formal category, which contains a bunch of products. To the left here we can see the faceted search that we have enabled on this category. Faceted search is basically the ability to narrow down products based on certain assets. In this case we have facets for the size and the color of the shirts, including the price here as well. When I click the facets, the result to the right will narrow down based on what I selected. And here we basically have the ability to figure out how we want the customers to be able to do the faceted search. We can do it with sliders, drop downs, single value facets, and so on and so forth. In this case, we have enabled the customers to select multiple values within the same facets, but basically it's up to us to figure out how we want to achieve it. We will see that in the code a little bit later. If we go to the back end of our installation, we have our category structure within the catalog like this. This is also what we see on the front end. With that we can select the individual categories. The top level APIs of Ucommerce allows you to do faceted search either as a generic search, where you have complete freedom on what you're doing faceted search on. But it also has the ability to do faceted search based on a category, which is the example that we're looking at right now, where the facets within this category will observe what products we have and it will automatically adjust. We'll see that in a few minutes. So let's take a look at the product data that we have for our category. Faceted search takes base in the dynamic properties that are on the products and on the variants. What that means is that the values that are for certain products, like the color of an individual shirt, will be indexed over to RavenDB, and then RavenDB will automatically figure out what facets values are available and return that for you. It can be based both on product families, which means that we have dynamic properties on the product family itself, but it also takes place like it does here on the facets for the individual variants. So if you want to narrow down search based on product family facets, you can do that, but you can also do it based on the individual variants. In this case, the color sizes and the colors that we see for this black and white Wonderland shirt for the variants will appear here and down here, which means that if I click on 15 and I click on whites, I will see black and white Wonderland down here in the end. And this is actually not the variant that I'm showing, but the product family, which means that the variant here is placed within my product family. So I'm displaying the product family based on facets that are done for the variants, which means that when I click in, we will be able to select the right variant right here. But you can also take the variants and display those as part of the product listing. This is just how it's done in Avenue Clothing. So facet values will automatically adjust based on the product data that we have. This means that if I go in and create another variant, BWWMSFSS something, and the name is plain 20, and I want the color size 20 in blue, and I click save. When this saves, Ucommerce will automatically index the new data over to RavenDB, and we should be able to see under formal that I can now select 20 and blue. So it has already been put over to my database. This happens automatically, so you don't have to worry about that. If you have a large set of data that you need to index initially over to RavenDB, you can run the scratch indexer. This is done under search in the settings area. So you probably want to do that once, and then when your store owners are updating the data set, it will automatically incrementally put the new data over. So you shouldn't have to worry about that. So this is facet values, but we also have something that are called multilingual facets. And what does that mean? Well, basically we can see here that we see color size, and this is not very user friendly. Let's try to change this a little bit. We can see under my product here that I have English and English in US. Remember that all the languages are coming from the CMS, regardless of what CMS we're using, whether it being Umbraco, Sitecore, Kentico, or Sitefinity. The CMS will always control the languages that we have available. So if we take a look at the language setting here for Umbraco, it says that we have English in US and English in UK. This means that this will reflect on all the places where I can maintain multilingual data for the website. So if we go down to our definition and we find the shirt definition, we can see that we have color size and color. So these are the internal names of the fields that I want to do facets on. Color size and color. But let's go in and change the color a little bit. So we have the same name here, but we want to have it in a display name that makes sense for the customer and not the internal name that looks a little bit developer-ish. So this is color in UK and color in US. This means that my facets should now automatically adjust based on the language that we are running on the website. So when I refresh here, we will now see that it says color in US, which indicates that my language are running in US. As a developer, we don't have to care about that, and we will see that when we get to the code in just a few minutes. So what I could do was that I could go in and change the culture and host names under the site, and says that this site is actually running ENGB. Save and publish. And when I refresh my site, we will now see color in UK. And this will automatically adjust based on the APIs if you use them directly with Ucommerce. Ucommerce will figure out what the language we're running on the site, and then we will behave based on that. This means that if you're running the same facet setup across multiple stores, the same code will apply, because we will figure out what the language and context is and then just use that. So you don't have to care about that. All right. So what about the color values? Because they are a little bit special also when we are talking about multilingual. Let's try to find the color facet, which is based on enum values in Ucommerce. So that will basically give you a drop down that you can select. Let's take blue as an example. We have a blue shirt. We have 8 results with blue shirts. Again, we can maintain this in multilingual fashion. So here we can say blue in UK and blue in US. Save it and refresh the front end. And we will now see that it says blue in UK instead. So again, the values of our facets will also automatically adjust. If we have multilingual facets where the value is language specific, the color here is a little bit special because we have one value and then we want to translate those in multiple ways. But we can also have a color size here which is not multilingual. It's just what it is. But if we mark the values as multilingual, we will also see the right translated values for that. So that is the language specific translations for each of the facets. Again, as I mentioned previously, the facets will be based on what we have in the certain category when we display facets and products within a category. So the facets will automatically adjust to what the result of the category is. So let's say that I want to have some shoes in my formal category here as well. Let's try to add a few products. Let's do paraboot. Click save. What we see on the front end here before I refresh is that we have the price facet, the color facet, and the color size facet. And we have 9 products or 9 product families that we have in the formal category here. When I refresh my page, we will now see shoe size as well, because now there's suddenly shoes within this category. So regardless of the facet setup that we have for the products, the facets will automatically adjust based on what's in the category. So it's very easy to work with. So let's see how we can actually maintain the facet values. On each of the fields for the product types, we have certain facets that we want to display, and that's actually based on the fields that we have on the definition system for the product definitions. What we can do is that on each of these fields we can mark them to be part of Faceted Search or not. So let's say that I want to see products and filter products based on the color. Let's say that for some reason I don't want to do that. Maybe it's data that are important for the product, but it's not important for the actual filtering. I can just untick use in Faceted Search and then refresh the front end. And now the color facets will automatically disappear. So it's very, very easy to set it up in Ucommerce and to use it in Ucommerce, both to figure out what facets you want and also for the translations of the facets. It will just automatically adjust properly. So that's how Faceted Search works. Let's try to create some code that displays the facets underneath the category navigation here on the masterclass solution that I have for Umbraco as well. Before we do that, let me just point out that this solution is generic across all CMSs. So my example here is Umbraco, but please keep in mind that you can apply this to your CMS as well in your web technology as well. The APIs of Ucommerce is flexible and will behave based on what you're using them for. All right, let's get to the code. Okay, let's use the API to grab the facets that we want to display in the first place. To do that, I can call Ucommerce API search library get facets for. It takes in our category that we have in the context, so that is our current category, and then a list of facets, and those facets are the facets that I have already selected. Initially we don't have anything, which means that we are showing the category page for the first time and the user will not have clicked anything. So we want to pass in a new list of facets. We want to change this in a few minutes when we get to update the actual values as well, because otherwise we will always see the same facets and not pass anything, and that will give us the entire result set. So the new list here needs to change once we get to clicking the actual facet values. So now we have a list of facets. We want to iterate that. And on the facet, we have a name, a display name, and the facet values that we are interested in populating. So we need to map those, which means that we need a new set of view model. So we have our facet view model. Let's create a new one. Called facet values. And on the facet values, let's call it facet value actually, we want to have a value and number of hits, which means that we need a public string facet value name. And this is of course going to be translated based on what I explained earlier on how facets works. And we want the hits, which indicates to the user how many hits do we actually have for this particular value. If we have 0, we can choose to filter them away, but for the purpose of displaying the facets and how they work, we will show them on the front end as well, but we can always hide them if we don't want to let the user click on empty values. So for each available facet option, we will have a number of hits, just like we saw on the demo store here. The facet value hits are the ones that we're displaying here in each of the buckets. So that's the facet value hits. So let's create another one. Let's call it facet group view model. We want a display name and we want a name. Let's see if we need to use both of them. And then we need a list of facet values. Let's change the name so it matches the rest of what we have. So it will be facet value view model. Let's try that one more time. To ensure that we're not getting a null reference exception, I will create the list here. So now we have the view models and we have the facets here. Now we just need to append the facet groups on our facet view models, which will also be a list. And we need constructor injection. So facets will be a new list, again to avoid null reference exceptions. Alright, so we have determined that we want to display facets down here. We have the facets and we're iterating the facets. So now we just need to create a new facet group for each of the facets that I have here. So on our facet view model, we need to append the facet here. Let's call that facet group view model. And we want to add that to our list. So this is just a lot of boilerplate code. All right, so on the facet group view model, we of course want to append the name and the display name. So we have the name and we have the display name, and now we want to map the values. To do that, we again want to create a new facet value view model. And we want to put that on our facet values. Like that. And on that we have our hits. And we have the name, or the value, that is. So that's it. That's the code to map the actual facets. Let's create the front end so we actually have something nice to show. All right, so let's adjust our front end here based on the newly created model that we have. First thing is that I want to iterate my facets on the model. And instead of saying facets should appear, we want to have a divider. Let's give it a class called well, just to be a little bit bootstrapish. And a legend where we type out the facet display name. And then we want to render each of the values. Let's create a label and an input box. Let's do a type checkbox. And on the value, I want the facet value name, which should be the display name. And then I want to render out a number that indicates the number of hits. So I will do hits here. Let's try to compile it and see what happens. And refresh the front end. And now we see the individual facets with each of the facet values and each of the hits. Now the trick is to somehow be able to gather the information from what the user is clicking on. We can do that either with JavaScript that picks up on the individual facets that we click, append that to a query string parameter and refreshes the page. That way we will be able to keep the facet values that we are clicking up to date with the query string parameters, and we will also be able to link to a certain category page with certain facets selected. So this is just some JavaScript gymnastic that we need to do. when we have gathered the facets, we need to be able to figure out what facet values the user has clicked on, which would be collecting the facet values and names and passing that into the APIs. So on the masterclass partial view controller, where we are getting the facets here, instead of passing in a new list of facet, we will pass in a list of facets that corresponds with the names and the values that we have selected. It would look a little bit something like this. I would have my private helper method that is called getFacets. Then I would pass that in here. Basically, it's the same model as the facets that we are rendering out. So we are iterating our facet here. The facet will have a name and it will have a certain amount of facet values that we have selected. That is also what we pass into the API. The next trick comes when I need to update the list corresponding to the facets. In this case, I have a partial view controller over here and a controller that renders the page over here. And those two are not interconnected to each other. So if we are doing the query string parameter way here, we need to use the same code that we are using to get the facets, to pass them in for the facets, as we will when we need to get the products. Let's take a look at how the category navigation controller here works. In here we are mapping a list of products by grabbing those from catalog library. Catalog library here is the normal entities, and this does not work on the faceted search. To do that instead, we need to call Ucommerce API search library, get products for a category, which is the current category that we're looking at right now. This is the same current category as we're using in the faceted search partial view. And then the list of facets that the user has selected. And that gives us document products that we can now display. Unfortunately, if we want to observe sort order based on what we said in the backend, the search library here will not observe that. So the list of facets that I narrow down here, as I have over here, will not be able to have sorting on it. So that's it. That's how faceted search works in Ucommerce. Thank you for watching and see you soon. Bye.